Okay, well, welcome to everyone. This is going to be a fabulously fun uh, frolic through the idea of choral literature and some of the most wonderful choral pieces ever written as we race through music history in the lens of choral music. Um, I love. I also taught at the university a course in choral literature, and it was my favorite teaching experience of the entire time I was an instructor. I love learning literature in music. Have any of you, by show of hands, studied seriously any English literature or literary literature like written novels, poetry? How many of us have studied in depth poetry? How many of us are poets? Yeah. The study of music literature is very similar to the study of written literature in that first, if you're reading and learning literature that way, you have to read it, right? There can be no fruitful conversation about literature if you have not experienced the literary thing. So I will encourage you to listen to as much of this music as you can. I have included links in the material, if you've already looked, to a lot of music to listen to, and I don't have any realistic expectation that we will all listen to all of those major works in their entirety. Although I'm telling you right now that if you make it through this month and you listen to everything in its entirety, you are going to be a rock star. You're going to know a lot of music. You're going to have an understanding of where this music is coming from and how it developed. And so I can't put it across any stronger than that. If you have the time, which most of us have the time, if not the energy, to listen to all this stuff, wow, you are going to be so thankful you did. And listen, when you get into the middle of the Verdi Requiem, you know what I mean? It's going to be worth it. But you'll only have an understanding of the Verdi Requiem or the Berlioz Requiem or the Mozart Requiem or any of those masses and things if you have an understanding of earlier forms of music. For instance, chant. All church music from these guys is very much related to what is happening in chant. The Duruflé Requiem, I don't know if any of you have sung the Duruflé, is literally chant with this funny music all around it, this organ halo around it for a whole hour. It's wonderful. You'll get an opportunity to hear that stuff. But I want to give you several things in particular about each little stage of music history we arrive at here. I've broken it down into periods. We discuss the history of music in terms of periods. And the medieval and the Renaissance period is by far the longest periods because there was less innovation during that time for many reasons. But it's interesting to examine several things about each period. Number one, the historical context. What is happening in history, in people, in different ways with people that is informing the way they make music. And of course, this being a choral literature class, there will be special emphasis on sung music. But one cannot have an understanding of especially Baroque choral music if you don't also know what these guys were doing instrumentally, because the choral music of the Baroque period in particular is very instrumental. Genres and characteristics of those genres. I want you to know at the end of this course about the major genres of music that are happening in the specific periods, and I want to present it in a way so that you can trace, what does a medieval mass sound like, or a Renaissance mass sound like, or a Baroque mass, or a classical mass, so that when you hear Mozart, you can understand what he was getting at and how he was reacting to the history and tradition of the church when he wrote those masses, so that when we get later to hearing Britten's War Requiem, you can appreciate how he abandoned all of that in order to write a war requiem for the church that had absolutely nothing to do with what was happening in church music and for glorious and wonderful expressive purposes. So we'll go through all of that. I hope you've seen the course contents already. But the medieval and Renaissance period happened this week. That'll be quite a crash through that. There's a lot of history to smash through in very little time. But that is one reason why I put this class at 7 instead of at 6, so that if we bleed over a little bit, that's possible. I'm going to try to limit this to an hour. I know an hour is a long time, but I hope we can get through it quickly. The Baroque period, think Bach, think Vivaldi, think Handel. The classical period, think Mozart, think Haydn, think Schubert, think Beethoven. The Romantic period, think Wagner, think Mahler, think Strauss. All the people everyone loved, Verdi, all the opera that most people think about is in the Romantic period. There's a lot of music, so much music, so little time. I've tried to identify what I believe the capstone and hallmark pieces of literature from each of those periods, particularly in week 2, 3, and 4. Week 1 is really generalized because much of the music from that period of the medieval and the Renaissance is very generalized, and that the techniques they're using, though many of them didn't know each other, and much of this music history was before the printing press, so they didn't really know what everyone was doing. Some of them weren't even writing music down yet. They were still kind of doing the same thing. There's some basic ways you can understand what they were doing that will allow you to understand the music of later periods better, give you a vocabulary to describe that music. Like I said earlier, listening to the works will give you a much greater appreciation of what they are and what they're doing. And I cannot stress enough how much listening really will make a difference. This class is not about the technical, theoretical aspects of these compositions. It's chiefly about what were they doing, what was the point of the music they were writing, what were they expressing, how effective was it, who was their audience. These are things that affect our decision-making in choral music today. When we program choral concerts today, we're thinking about the same things. So we're gonna crash through this pretty quickly. My dogs are like, dude, we don't want to hear about choral literature. Too bad. Let's get right into this. So what I'd like to do is I'll read a little bit in the material, particularly in the medieval period and the Renaissance period today, so that we can help each other define these terms very, very quick, very, very well, so that we can all be on the same footing going forward. Here we go. If you have the material in front of you, you can follow along, or I think you can see my shared screen. Yes? Someone nod to me. Yes, okay, good. Good. You can cheat along with my copy here. The medieval period of music is the period from years about 500 to 1400. It's the longest period of music, embracing about 900 years of music history. It runs right from around the time of the fall of the Western Roman Empire to the beginning of the Renaissance. The vast majority of medieval music was monophonic. So in this word, monophonic means one sound at a time. So when you think of Gregorian chant, for instance, which is one, maybe not one person, but a group of people singing the same notes at the same time in unison, that is monophonic music. The development of polyphonic music, so more than one sound, was a major shift towards the end of the era that laid the foundations for the Renaissance. When you think of Renaissance music, you think of Byrd and Tallis and things like that. You're hearing multiple voices at once. And in fact, at the end of the Renaissance, before the Council of Trent and some of the counter-reformational things happening, there was music being written for 25, 30, 45, 50 parts. It's ridiculous. It's very wonderful to sing. It's like a cacophony of sound. It's amazing. Gregorian chant, consisting of a single line of vocal melody unaccompanied in free rhythm, was one of the most common forms of medieval music. This is not surprising given the importance of the Roman Catholic Church during the period. The Mass was and still is a ceremony that included set texts, which is the liturgy, which were spoken and sung. How many of you had opportunity to listen to this repertoire before our talk tonight? Oh, good. Good. That's going to help you big time. So you already have an understanding of what this music sounded like, which is the most important thing. As the medieval period progressed, composers began to experiment and polyphonic styles began to develop. Organum was a crucial early technique which explored polyphonic texture. It consisted of 2 lines of voices in varying heterophonic textures. So when you talk about heterophony versus homophony, when in Gregorian chant, when you have monophony, everyone sings the exact same notes. In heterophonic music, people are singing the same melodies, but they're ornamenting them differently. You hear a lot of heterophonic music in pop music, right? You'll hear an instrumental melody line and then someone singing the same melody, but both of them are ornamented differently. That is very heterophonic. That's difficult to define sometimes. But the difference is in how things are ornamented and how things are put together in a way that they're still one organism singing at the same time, but with different things. Parallel organum is when those 2 voices move in the same direction at the same distance from each other. Free organum is when they move in whatever ways, but there's 2 voices moving at the same time, but in differing harmonies. Melismatic organum is when you have one voice singing and sustaining a drone, while the other one sings this free sort of elaboration above it. And so one thing that I really like about this melismatic organum music is what they would do is they would take a chant melody, like the Ubi Caritas, for instance. And the melody for the Ubi Caritas is Ubi Caritas et amor. So the tenor voice, which is the one holding these long notes, this guy would go, ooh, and the other voice would freely ornament the thing. And then the next note they sang about a minute later would be B, and then Ka, Ri. And so you'd have this chant melody in this extreme slow motion, sustaining a drone with these free ornaments above it. Very modern. If you listen to some of this music, some of it comes across to our ears as being very modern because it does not sound like, the traditional sort of typical things. And it's all old music. Some of these guys are writing some hairy music too. Very dissonant, expressive things. Very, very beautiful. And notice that I just gendered the idea of the composer of this era. I want to bring to your attention all the time, there were women writing music in every period of music the entire time. Massive amounts of music were written by women. And one thing that I think we miss in music history is we miss these works written by women. I mean, even people like Clara Schumann in the Romantic period, someone who was even married to Robert Schumann, a very, very famous composer. She wrote music that was at times better than his. But for some reason, history has not remembered it the way we remembered Robert's music. And the consequence for that is that we just don't have recordings of that music and access to the scores the way we have other things. So there is this inherent gender bias in the study of choral music history, but it's my personal academic endeavor to fix that in as much as I can, because it's so not fair. There's one of the first known female composers, Hildegard von Bingen, wrote some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my entire life. And for some reason, she kind of made it through in the history books. We like to talk about her, probably because by time, 1,500 years go by, people are a little more comfortable about talking about women who wrote music. But it's all worth knowing. There's always women writing music, and even women who are writing music under pen names and things like that. That's still stuff we have to find out. If you can listen to the significant words for further listening in this section, this is where you're going to hear some of this really special stuff. This Ave Generosa by Hildegard von Bingen is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. Machaut, a guy who lived, how many years ago? 700 years ago, writing music in Notre Dame. Yes, that Notre Dame. His Messe de Notre Dame was written for that place, for people who were studying music there. And you can hear that now. You can hear the same sounds they heard in Notre Dame 600 years ago. It's wonderful music. Very interesting. One thing that I don't write about in the material here that I think is ignored conveniently in the history books is the influence of Arab music on the music of the church during that time. France, there was a huge movement of Arab people into France as they conquered some of that territory there. And so you can hear different recordings of the Messe de Notre Dame by Machaut, where they either accentuate the presence of their music in the recording or they don't. So you can hear what I call vanilla recordings, where it's very just what's on the page, and it sounds like a lot of the other music from the period. But if you hear them sing it in an ornamented fashion, you can hear the effects of those call to prayers and the way that the Arab people sang their music on the performance of this music, and it gives it a whole new life and variety. One thing I think we forget too is that people sang differently at different times. I mean, compare the way people sing pop music today to the way they sang it in the year 2000 or the year 1990 or the year 1980. Very, very wide variations in the way we sang things. The same is true in music history. And if that's true in 10-year intervals right now, I'm sure it was that way in 100-year intervals. Things to consider about music from this period is that they were writing with these cathedrals in mind. And if you haven't been in one of these cathedrals, which I have not either, I don't think we can truly appreciate the scale of these cathedrals. I saw a performance recently of one of Bruckner's masses in the church that he was the organist at. This church is massive. I mean, you can fit office buildings inside some of these churches, and they're designed so that sound travels through them in a particular way. And so this music was written with a certain environment in mind, and when you take it out of that environment, you change it, even if you don't change the way you sing it. When you move music to different environments, you change it. It's like changing the kind of canvas you're painting on. You might have the same paints and the same brushes, but if you paint on cardboard, it's going to be different than you paint on canvas. All of that's true about this literature. Pay attention to that when you're looking at recordings. Pay attention to what their values are as they perform this music. And they're all valid and they all have a place, but one thing I don't want you to ever think is that there is any one unilateral, unified, God-ordained approach or interpretation to anything. They're all very varied. And we see that in the music of this period. I cannot understate the significance of the Roman Catholic Church. The Church held all the resources for the continuation of things over the years. So they kept the libraries of knowledge. They wrote down their chants. That's where they were kept. That is where people learned to sing. That's where they learned to read music once they started writing music down with neumes. It used to take 10 years, back before they invented written notation. A boy would study at the church, and it would take 10 years for them to learn the year's cycle of chants for the calendar of the church. When Guido d'Arezzo invented a different way to memorize this music, it was reduced to 4 years. And then once they were able to print this in books, anyone who could read music could chant the chants of the day without having to memorize it. But the people that were funding these innovations in music, as unoften as they happened during this period, was the Roman Catholic Church. And during the Renaissance, toward the end of the Renaissance, when after Luther's Reformation and big changes in the church happened, you start to hear these divergent musical styles following the trends of the people who are also finding themselves divergent from another. differing ideologies lead to different forms of expression, which lead to different genres of music and different kinds of influence. One thing I wish I had included in your packet, which I had a brilliant professor who the first thing he would present to us during a study of music of a particular period was the visual art of the period. When you look at the visual art of the medieval time and the Renaissance times, you have a certain sense of their perspective. For instance, in the medieval times, if you look at the arts that are created in these books, these paintings in the Bibles and the books of the time, you see very much focus on one central figure at a time with surrounding elements. That can also define their approach to chant. You had one chant melody that was then ornamented around it in a particular way. In the Renaissance period, you see many more figures in the paintings, but they're all two-dimensional. They hadn't quite figured out perspective or three-dimensionality in their paintings yet, and you can hear that in their music. Many more voices, but very much within this limited paradigm of chant melody, very small ranges, that kind of thing. Human thought is very unified in that the way I perceive what I see is going to inform the way I perceive what I hear, and it's going to shape what I express through my mouth as well. And so if you look at music history in that way, you can really arrive at a really interesting, albeit sometimes completely wrong, conclusion about what people are doing and what they're thinking, and how they are and what the issues are and everything. You can arrive at that through a survey of the arts as a whole. But particularly in choral music in this period, I can't understate the importance of the Roman Catholic Church. During the Renaissance period, you're going to hear me say Renaissance. I don't know why I do this. You can say Renaissance. It's okay. However you want to say it is fine. The main characteristics of Renaissance music are music based on modes. Modes is a really scary word, just describing a scale beginning on a certain note. So if you think about a piano keyboard, there's C, D, E, F, G, A, B are the white notes on the keyboard, right? You can start and play a scale from C to C. That's the Ionian mode. The same set of notes starting on D, going from D to D, is the Dorian mode. E to E is the Phrygian mode. F to F is the Lydian mode. So it's just basically taking the set of notes and starting them on a different one in order to achieve a certain tone color. If you have a piano in your house, right after this meeting, go to the piano and play some triads on starting on different notes on the piano and hear the different qualities of these modes. They use the different modes to express different things. Joyous, triumphant music was very much Ionian or Lydian. Those are the major modes. Later on, we derive major modes from that. The more penitential times were in Dorian mode and Aeolian mode and Phrygian mode. Those are the minor modes. So you can explore that a little bit right on your piano, play whatever you want on the white keys and explore that a little bit. Richer texture with 4 or more independent melodic parts being performed simultaneously. These interweaving melodic lines, a style called polyphony, is one of the defining features of Renaissance music. Blending rather than contrasting melodic lines in the musical texture. So in the medieval period, if you hear some of these old polyphony organum from the medieval period, you'll hear sort of hairy, kind of independent voices. But in the Renaissance period, the aim was to create a seamless sound that sort of traveled at the same pace, at the same time, all moving at different times, but still staying together. Harmony that placed a greater concern on the smooth flow of the music and its progression of chords. Here is something very important that is difficult, perhaps, to understand. When our contemporary understanding of music is sort of informed by how pop music works, right? You have a melody, a soloist singing a melody with guitar chords under it. Am I right? We kind of sort of think of music that way. Oh, yeah, I can sing the melody and I can play the chords on the guitar. That is not the way music worked in the Renaissance period. There were different voices, and as they moved along in their independent structures, in their independent melodies, they would arrive on beats in these chords. And so our ears today tend to perceive Renaissance music as chord changes, but the composers of the time thought of each voice as being an independent, self-contained melody. And in fact, in the Renaissance period, if you look at some of the original scores from the period, the composers never wrote the vocal parts one on top of the other the way we read music in choir now. They had part books. So the sopranos would have a book, and they'd stand around the book, and they would all read just the soprano line. They wouldn't even know what the altos and tenors and basses were singing. And so the altos had their own book, and the tenors had their own book, and the basses had their own book. That's how they facilitated group singing socially. They would stand around the table in their respective parts in a square with their book, and they would sing their part. And then how it all came together was this magical and wonderful, mysterious thing, which it still is. But they were really thinking of music in terms of long, independent lines. You can see that in really good hymn writing in hymnals. The hymns of Martin Luther, for instance, or the harmonizations by Bach, which are harmonizations of melodies written during the Renaissance, because the Lutheran Reformation and the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation happened during the Renaissance period. In some of this hymn writing, you can see these independent lines happening. And as a matter of fact, if you look at an old hymnal and you look at the original form of A Mighty Fortress, that thing is a Renaissance dance. It is not this stately, homophonic thing. That they're dancing around on that melody in a terrific way. And you can see that. And when I play it on the organ at church, I try to emphasize the Renaissance dance aspect of that. I haven't put a tambourine on it yet, but I don't want to be fired. The development of polyphony produced the notable changes in musical instruments that marked the Renaissance from the Middle Ages musically. Its use encouraged the use of larger ensembles and demanded sets of instruments that would blend together across the whole vocal range. Folks, this is why we have different sized violins. They called them viols then. But this is why the violin is a small form of the viola, which is a smaller form of the cello, which is a smaller form of the bass. Because they wanted a family of instruments that sounded similar, even if they were playing in different registers. So the contrabass, the string bass, is the contrabass voice. Contra meaning below, bass, an octave below the bass. The cello is the bass voice. The viola is the tenor voice. And then there used to be these little alto violins, the alto viols, which would have played the alto part. But now these days, you have violins playing the soprano and the alto voice. That's why in the modern symphony orchestra, we have first and second violins, violas, cellos, and bass. We've inherited this four-voice structure all the way from the Renaissance period, even in our modern symphony orchestras. Isn't that interesting? Principal liturgical or church-based musical forms which remained in use throughout the Renaissance period were masses and motets, with some other developments towards the end of the era, especially as composers of sacred music began to adopt secular or non-religious musical forms for religious use. The 15th and 16th century masses had two kinds of sources that were used, monophonic and polyphonic, with two main forms of elaboration based on a cantus firmus practice, or beginning sometime around 1500, the new style of pervasive imitation. When you're thinking about cantus firmus, that is going back to what I was talking about earlier in the Ubi Caritas. Cantus firmus, think the firm foundational voice. They would sing the chant melody that everyone would know, really slow and long. The tenor voice would hold those. And then there would be free, interesting elaboration in the other voices around it. We don't hear this very much in church anymore, at least sung congregationally. The pervasive imitation system is what we know now as hymn writing. So you have a melody in one voice with this imitative rhythm in the other voices moving along at the same time. During this period, secular music had an increasing distribution with a wide variety of forms, but one must be cautious about assuming an explosion in variety, since printing made music more widely available. Much more has survived from this era than from the preceding medieval era, and probably a rich store of popular music from the late Middle Ages is lost. Secular music was music that was independent of churches. You all know that. The main types were the German Lied, the French chanson, the Italian madrigal, and the Spanish villancico. So when you look at music history and you look at the library, if you were to look in this library at the different periods of music, the medieval music seems very limited, and it also seems very limited to the church, only because it was very difficult to maintain this body of repertoire since things weren't being written down. And when they were written down, they were written by hand and they couldn't be mass printed. When you look at the repertoire in the Renaissance period, you see there's way more. And it's not because people suddenly got smart and there was suddenly more done. It's just that we have evidence of it now because the printing press, because of more cosmopolitan attitudes of the time, where people were traveling from city to city. And in fact, Martin Luther, after the Reformation, after the split from the Roman Catholic Church, would often write to Roman Catholic composers saying, bro, I really loved that Sanctus I heard at your church that one time. Can you send me the melody so that I can repurpose it in my church? And that is absolutely how some of that music happened. Martin Luther loved all kinds of music, and he would often take Latin, music written in Latin from other churches, and repurpose it for the Deutsche Messe and things like that. It was happening all over the place. This is why that was such a major thing. Let's talk about the Mass. If you go to church, at least to a liturgical church, you'll have some basic understanding of what the liturgy is. The point of the liturgy in the Roman Catholic tradition is for the expression of the Eucharist being the primary sacramental event in the service. The term Mass is commonly used in the Roman Catholic Church as well as in Anglican circles, Lutheran circles. Only 5 parts of the ordinary Mass, the Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei, were set to music by Renaissance composers. The Kyrie is the Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. Gloria, glory to God in the highest. Credo, it literally means I believe. It's a definition of belief. Sanctus is the holy, 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 the hymn the angels sing at the end of days. Agnus Dei, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. The 5 very important events that happen during the church service is the parts that they would set to music. There's 2 kinds of liturgy in the Mass. There's the ordinary, and then there's the hold on. Ordinary and tip of my tongue. Anyway, there are parts of the service that are only sung on certain festival days. And so the composers didn't frequently set that because it would only be performed once a year or twice a year. And they wanted music they could get a lot of mileage out of. So they set the ordinary. The proper parts of the service are the things that are performed only on special occasions. The ordinary Mass is the things that are performed at other times. So they set these so they can get a lot of mileage out of the music they write, because y'all, it took a long time for people to learn new music by rote when they didn't have this stuff written down and there wasn't very much literacy. So the Mass, think of the Mass always as the parts of the service that do not change. The motet, no matter what church you may go to, there will be different readings. The motet is kind of this idea that we're going to set a particular section of the text that is important for the day that would be performed at particular times. The motet was one of the preeminent polyphonic forms of Renaissance music. According to Margaret Bent, a piece of music in several parts with words is how you define it. They come in all different shapes and sizes. An imitative counterpoint for chorus, a Latin text, usually sacred, not specifically connected to the liturgy of a given day, and suitable for use in any service. In the latter part of the 16th century, Giovanni Gabrieli and other composers developed a new style called the polychoral motet, poly meaning more than one, choral meaning choir, right? In which 2 or more choirs of singers or instruments alternated. This worked really well in these big cathedrals again because they had different naves that they could use and sing back and forth and give you the impression of this massive, army of angels singing or anything else that they needed to express. This style of motet was sometimes called the Venetian motet, to distinguish it from the Netherlands or Flemish motet written elsewhere. If Ye Love Me by Thomas Tallis serves the demand of the Church of England for English text and a focus on understanding the words beginning in homophony. Around the Renaissance period, again, reflected in some of the ideology of folks like Martin Luther and others in the Counter-Reformation to present the content of the church service in the vernacular language. You found that in music then reflected this importance in the expression of particular words. They were no longer just operating on rote where you knew that, oh, they're singing the Kyrie, I know what those words are. And so it didn't matter if you heard the particular words the choir was singing because you knew the words. It became more and more important that every time they were expressing precisely what the words were in a way that could be understood by everyone, not just the educated. Madrigals originated in Italy during the 1520s. The madrigal is mostly secular in nature. Think of the madrigal as folk songs. They tend to have verses, multiple verses, so you repeat. They tend to have dance rhythms because folks would, dance through them, and there would be percussion and instruments, and think of a party where people are singing folk songs and dancing to them. Traditionally, they're unaccompanied. Sometimes they didn't have instruments. The number of voices varies from 2 to 8, most likely from 3 to 6 if you're looking at madrigals and scores. In Italy, the madrigal was the most important secular form of music of its time, reaching its formal and historical zenith by the second half of the 16th century. At about the same time, English and German composers took up the madrigal as well. After the 1630s, the madrigal began to merge with the cantata and the dialogue, with the giving birth to opera. Madrigals are wonderful. And, they even like to cater to people who couldn't read yet. There was plenty of those. And so that is the reason why on some of those little songs you have fa la 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 la. Those are the little refrains that people who couldn't read the words when they were reading the music could sing that part, because everyone knows fa la 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 la. And the reason why we have some of that in our Christmas music, for instance, is because they're repurposed madrigals from the early days of madrigals. The Lied. The word Lied is German for song. When you're looking at German words, if it's a noun, the word is going to be capitalized. So you'll see German words for nouns capitalized in the middle of a sentence is not random. And it's also one of the reasons why in titles of German pieces, not every word is capitalized, because they only capitalize to indicate objects, nouns. The 14th century brought a decline of the monophonic Lied and the introduction of polyphonic Lieder. Lieder just means songs, for 2 or more voices or voice and instruments. One of the most popular polyphonic Lieder is the 2-voice Wach auf mein Gott, Awake My Darling, by Oswald of Wolkenstein. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. I hope you have a chance to listen to that. 15th century saw a flowering of polyphonic Lieder for as many as 4 voices singing together. People were singing together more often because there was the existence of the written music. And so these part books were being printed now. Music was being mass produced. Everyone was learning to read. People were learning to read because suddenly they were in church every day and it was presented in a language that they were speaking. So they were learning all these different, everyone was becoming more literate. So everyone was singing and playing and doing more. Bar form and romantic text predominate, and through composed pieces, meaning pieces that aren't verse, 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 occur. The tunes are usually sung by the middle part, the tenor. Often the parts accompanying the tenor are played on instruments. The tenor melody is often a pre-existent familiar one, not a tune newly composed for the polyphonic Lied. So composers were taking very familiar tunes so that people could sing them, and they were writing more complex parts around it as accompaniment or as embellishment for people who wanted to explore that kind of thing. So there is still this emphasis on the common person's not just understanding of, but their participation in music making socially. Franco-Flemish influences appear in the relations among the parts. Sometimes the texture is chordal, so you have voices moving at the same time, kind of chording, harping chords. Otherwise, one part may imitate the melody of another voice for part of a phrase. When three parts are present, whether sung or played and sung, the tenor and top part descant form a harmonic unity, while the third part, the countertenor, skips between and below the other two. Innsbruck Ich muss dich lassen by Isaac is literally one of the most beautiful pieces ever written at any time. If you don't listen to anything else so far, listen to that. Innsbruck. Oh my gosh, it's so good. The word chanson is French for song. So songs written in Germany were called Lied because they speak German, and the word for song in German is Lied. And in France, songs are called chansons because in French, that's the word for song. Originally, these French songs were monophonic, one voice with without instrument, just like in Germany. The first important composer of chanson was Guillaume de Machaut, who composed three voice works in the forme fixe during the 14th century. Forme fixe are what we're talking about, where they base the whole piece on a familiar melody or on a chant melody that everyone would have known. That is the form that was fixed, was the familiar part. And then the parts around it were embellished and made new and expressive and all these things. Guillaume Dufay and Guy Bechois, who wrote so-called Burgundian chansons because they were from the area known as Burgundy, were the most important chanson composers of the next generation. Their chansons were more simple, generally in three voices with a structural tenor. So the structural tenor, again, that voice that is familiar, the melody that people would have been able to sing with. These works are still typically three voices with an active upper, descant, and two lower parts. So we're seeing this, we're seeing the establishment of this four-voice texture. That is why even today, people think of legitimate choirs as being SATB choirs, because that's what we thought for a long time. It's sort of established in the Renaissance period, though, that there were four voices. Those four voices spanning the possibility in terms of range, from the highest of the sopranos down to the lowest of the basses. You can get to all of those registers if you have soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Later 15th and early 16th century figures in this genre included Johannes Ockeghem and Josquin de Prez. These works cease to be constrained by form fixe and begin to feature a pervading imitation. So they're writing new melodies and they're using the melody often in the piece. And it's a way to teach it. It's a way to be familiar. It's their way of making the new listeners comfortable. They could hear the melody a couple times right at the beginning. So they're like, okay, I got the melody. I can listen to this now, right? We do the same thing in church, y'all. We're doing the same thing all the time. Nothing has ever changed. There's nothing new under the sun. The first book of music printed from movable type was Harmonies Musicae au Décaton, a collection of 96 chansons by many composers published in Venice by Ottaviano Petrucci. To this day, the Petrucci Library is online at imslp.org. Many of the public domain music is published online at the Petrucci Library in honor of Petrucci, who did some of the very first music publishing 500 years ago. So that is a crash course through the medieval and the Renaissance, okay? A couple of things I want you to remember. That in this time, before there was any kind of unified, before there was a lot of traveling, there was any mail, there was any unifying factors in their lives, there was no unified movements in music either, okay? So at the year 1400, people didn't magically wake up that day and say, oh, it's 1400, now we're in the Renaissance, now we have to write different music. That's not what happened. They were writing music in many styles at the same time. They called the old style Stil Antico, the old style, and Ars Nuova was the new style. And so people like Palestrina could compose in styles and in manners that were older or newer, depending on the context, depending on what was needed, particularly after the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation and the Council of Trent, when it became very, very important to be very clear in the expression of text and the expression of ideas. Um, People like Palestrina, the music did change to serve that purpose, because that was sort of handed down that, okay, if you're going to make music in the church, you can't be writing these 45 voice motets anymore. How about 4 voices, or how about 3 voices, in a way that we can actually understand these words and make this happen in a way that helps people and doesn't just, isn't just ornamental. But music making was happening on a local level, and the churches of the areas were where all of this learning and all this innovation was happening. And as we see the secularization of music, you start to see faster and faster innovation in music, because obviously secular composition was not constrained by the archetypes and the requirements of the church. And so you see different meters, and you see different instrumental aspects and different dance type rhythms sort of start to populate the sacred music of the day too. And so that's why A Mighty Fortress, for instance, sounds, if you do it in the original way, sounds like a Renaissance dance, because Martin Luther, he wrote, and he had confessed to frequenting bars, and he liked to drink beer, and he heard the music every day. And so that's why his music sounds like it, kind of. So, they were embracing all of this music that they heard, and it all kind of became part of what they were doing. But what I want you to take away from even more than that is this idea that the anthropological facts of the time really informed what music was doing. Music did not happen in a vacuum. Music was not this thing handed down from the divinity in a certain way for a certain purpose. It was developed, and it changed shape according to how people were thinking at the time. I keep referencing Martin Luther because I just did a class on that time period in Lutheran history. And when they started to stop thinking about the church service in the old way and started to think about it in the sense that the word was sacrament, not just the Eucharist, the expression of words became more important. And so you see that change in music very clearly. And that's why we have this tradition of hymn singing in churches, in all kinds of different churches, because the Lutherans developed this way of singing words in a way that was congregational, so everyone could participate. Songs and hymns of that day were not sung in harmony, by the way, they were sung in unison. And it became a clear form of expression, and it's been handed all the way down into our Baptist hymnals today that I grew up singing. So it was what they were thinking about in terms of life that were informing the changes in music. And as the printing press was invented, and as music made it around Europe, you do see a little bit more of this group think about what music is doing and how to make it really good. You see a lot of stealing happen too. Composers stole from each other all the time. And so to this day, there's a lot of confusion sometimes about the authenticity of the authorship of certain pieces of music. Even up to Mozart's day, there are things that people attributed to Mozart that aren't his at all. And his student Süssmayr actually stole a lot of his music. And only recently have we sort of put a lot of Süssmayr's catalog back under Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and realized that Süssmayr wasn't as good as he thought he was. So this is happening all over the place. And just as important as it is to know about the technical aspects of what music is doing, it's probably more important to understand what these folks were going through and what was shaping their thinking and their lives, and what the other arts were doing. What did dance look like? If you see any period dancing, like contra dancing from the Renaissance period, it does not look like what you would expect it to. And it informs my thinking about madrigals, because these folks were not leaping in the air, they were stomping. Dancers of the day stomped on the beat. And so that tells me how these things should feel. And if madrigals feel like ballet, we're lifting and leaping and jumping, then we're probably missing something. But you wouldn't know that if you hadn't studied pictures and paintings of dancing figures from the Renaissance period. So get fascinated and look at what's happening all around these things. How many of you were able to listen to some or all of those examples? Yeah. Now that we've sort of crashed through those really quick, go back and click on at least some of that and listen and trace how music was developing through that. and listen for the differences in harmony and the differences in terms of voice textures. You're going to see a lot of that return. The composers in the 20th century, when there was a sort of renaissance of Renaissance music, they brought some of these old forms back, and it's the reason why our modern music sounds so modern. Some of the reasons why we listen to this old music sometimes, we're like, dude, that sounds really modern, because it does. It doesn't sound like church music. It doesn't sound like music we sing all the time. Okay, that's the medieval and Renaissance period of music. One thing that's important to note is that composers of this era were very fascinated by and interested in text painting. So they knew what these texts meant, and they were going after an authentic expression of the meaning of the text, what they considered to be the objective meaning of the text. That is important to note. As we go into the Baroque period, there was this movement called the doctrine of affections, in which the belief was that you could only feel one emotion strongly at a time. So that's why in Baroque music, you see a lot of this where there's, like in the Vivaldi Gloria, for instance, it's varying dramatic shifts in mood going from one movement to the other, because they only wanted to express one feeling at a time. Then when you move into the classical period, they prioritized elegance over everything else and a clarity to the singing line. But in the Romantic period, that's where you get into not what does the text mean objectively, but what do I, as Giuseppe Verdi, believe about the mass text, and I'm going to write that into my Requiem. And so that's why in Verdi's Requiem, you can hear this questioning at the end. You're not sure if he believes what he's written. And this is where you get into all this kind of frou-frou stuff about what these composers were really thinking and getting into the head of the composer. But it makes that music of that era very, very fascinating, because it's more like your English class where they're like, why is the curtain red? Is it because the author means blah, blah, blah? We really do that, the Romantic period, because they truly meant that. But during the medieval period and the Renaissance period, they were just trying to be honest about what the text meant, and they were trying to develop ways to inflect music the way we inflect speech. So if I were to sum all that up in 1 minute, composers were tasked with expressing things in a more clear vernacular way than they had before. And so you saw divergent musical styles happening as they tried to express the objective truth of not only the text, but of their nationalities and of their understanding of life. So you're going to see a different flavor come out of Germany in the cold than you would out of Spain in the warm, or out of Great Britain or any of these different areas. That's why the music is divergent, because they're trying to be faithful to their understanding of text and their understanding of truth. And so it's important to know what they thought truth was. But this is an ongoing educational thing. You're always plumbing different things. It's impossible to get it all in 4 years of education, let alone 1 day. But that is the medieval and Renaissance period in a nutshell, a very small one. And I hope you get a chance to listen to some of that music. Would we like to, what are your questions? What are your thoughts on all that?
Quick question.
Uh-huh.
I was listening to the Dufay, and it kind of jumped to the next song in YouTube. And the next one on the list was something called, I gotta find it, Ecclesiae Militantis. And I was listening to it, it's very beautiful. And at the very end, though, it went into this crazy minor kind of chord, and then it resolved. I hadn't heard anything like it before or since in that stuff. And I didn't know, what was that? What was going on there? Is that common? What was that? What was it?
So they, in this time period, in Dufay's time period, they did not think of harmony the same way we do. We think of beautiful consonant harmonies being major and minor chords, but they did not think of chords. They thought that consonant, beautiful, resting harmony were in fifths. And so when they were resolving things at the ends of pieces, they would resolve these double leading tones. So not only did you have B going up to C, Ti, Do, but you had Fi going to So. And so to our ears, it sounds wacky, you know, but
It
in
was,
their ears, you would hear
yeah,
this fifth moving at the same time, which was very peaceful to their ears.
it was just one note. It was so strange. I hadn't heard it before or since.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's all over that period of music, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, they did this double leading tone thing in order to be consonant to them. But to our contemporary ears, you're right, it sounds wacky.
Okay.
Wacky doodle. Yeah, it does. Any other thoughts about what you heard? Is anyone scandalized about what I said about A Mighty Fortress? Mighty Fortress should dance along. It's a happy thing. Oh, hold on. I can't hear you, Elizabeth. Unmute yourself. I see you talking there.
Hi.
There we go.
Okay. Is there anywhere that you know where we can hear A Mighty Fortress as a dance? Is there anywhere on YouTube where somebody did it the right way?
You know, I've been hunting and hunting
way?
for something that I'm really satisfied with, but I haven't really found anything yet. I keep meaning to do it myself.
Yeah.
I might just have to do that. I can find something in the meantime and send it to you. Let me write that down real fast.
If you do it, I'll dance it.
All right. Who's bringing the beer, though?
Bring the beer. I don't do beer.
Me either. Yeah, Mighty Fortress.
I had one more question. You mentioned back when we were talking about the medieval stuff, like 30 parts altogether. Do you have an example of that you could point us to?
Yes, let me send that out too.
Okay.
I should have put that in the literature. I knew you would all be fascinated. In the YouTube video that I always show of that too, you can't even read the music. I mean, it's like 50 parts. It's like 45
I'd love to
parts.
hear it. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
And they would stand in different groups around the church, and it just probably sounded like a mighty cacophony of harmony and beauty. I can't imagine.
What was the reason for doing those many, many parts?
Because they could. So at a certain point, the composers of the big cathedrals were in competition with each other. And so if, you know, you can write a 4-part motet, then I'm going to write an 8-part one. Then I'm going to write a 16-part one. And I'm going to write a polychoral 32-part one, you know. And so they were just competing and being so-and-so with each other.
I have to say that I was in Notre Dame Cathedral when they were practicing one day.
Oh.
Wonderful.
It's my goal to get over there and hear that, because I want to hear that music in its native environment, its native ecology, and see how it changes my vision of it. There's certain recordings too of the Sistine Chapel choir. The Sistine Chapel is a beautiful place to sing too. I've heard recordings out of there, but when they take that choir out of there to make recordings, they sound horrible, because they're used to making music in the particular way for the Sistine Chapel with its particular acoustics. And so I think, I forget, I was taught that. I've been taught everything. I didn't come up with any of this. But I forget who exactly taught me. It's like, there is an environment that this music was written for, and you don't have to do it in that environment, but you have to be aware of that environment. And particularly the music of these periods, they were born and raised in the cathedral, and you have to consider them in that light. And yeah.
And when you talk about all these people who could read the music and they would have this part, who was singing? Was it professional choirs? I know it was monks sometimes, but who was doing the singing?
Well, you had the people who had taken vows, monastic vows, and also vows to the church, so adults. But the churches ran these extravagant educational programs where children, in order to receive an education, would be sent to these churches, and they would be sort of boarded there. And boys in particular were boarded, and they would serve as altar boys and serve as pages and acolytes, and they would learn music, and they would learn to read, and they would learn all of these things, and they would also sing in the choir as part of their education. And we see that tradition continue all the way up through Bach's time. Bach ran this all of the music making in this big city. And he had several schools where the students were the ones singing in the choir. And so that's why his music was so innovational, because he could make these innovations happen and the kids had no choice. And then the advent of the professional choir really didn't happen until the Romantic period in the 19th century, where you had these choirs of hired singers doing things. I think that was really influenced by opera, because you had the town opera companies and people who were paid to perform in the opera companies, and that sort of led to the professional chorus. But also, I mean, the entire time, as soon as people became very literate, especially getting up into the 19th century, you saw community choirs springing up. And the music of the sacred harp that we sing here in the United States is a relic of that, of this kind of old-fashioned singing that sprang up around that time.
Josh, when I was looking at some of the music that accompanied a lot of the pieces that you put together for us to listen to, at what point did key signatures start to come into existence in this? Because I noticed, the very early pieces do not have, they're all written in C. And then I noticed that a couple of the pieces were written in F. And those were the only two key signatures I noticed in the in the pieces that you gave us, that with the accompanying notations.
So this is a really, really wonderfully fascinating topic. It's also very complicated, because early on, when music was based in these relationships of a fifth and pure tuning, the music really was not centered around key. There was this home note in the mode, but there was no tonicization of the key. There was no dum ba da 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 bum bum. There was no tonicization of a home note in that time. Then, as keyboard instruments became prominent, and it became important for us to tune these keyboard instruments in a way that we didn't have to tune them again in between each piece, we started arriving at this sense of key. And then key signatures arose just out of a desire to be clear and uncomplicated in notation of those things. There is a wonderful documentary about this equal temperament idea by a guy. I can send you the link. It's about an hour long. It's totally worth your time. It's hilarious. He's a Brit, and he puts it in a way that anyone can understand what is happening and why it's important to tune things a certain way, and then why tonality and the idea of key kind of comes out of that naturally. It's really interesting. It's very important, but it requires, in order for a true understanding of that, it requires some expert information, which is boring. I think this documentary puts it in a way that's practical and lets us understand. Yeah, but that's why the key signatures. Yeah.
So what time period about what years did the development of the key signatures
in the Baroque era?
So okay.
And in fact, Bach, when he wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is a cycle of preludes and fugues in every key, major and minor, was him showing off that he had figured out a way to tune the harpsichord so that he could play all of these pieces without retuning it. But back before they did this equal temperament, you arrive at some interesting things. In some of Bach's music, when there are difficult situations, like in the Crucifixus section of his Mass in B minor, when it's in the middle of the credo talking about about Christ crucified, he puts that section in the key of F sharp minor, which before they were equally tempering the keyboards would have been the most out of tune. So it would have been the most unpleasant key to play in, and he did it deliberately in order to bring tension and pain to that section of that Mass, to express the meaning of that text. Very fascinating things. Nothing we do now, but it helped then. Any other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I got one more for you.
Yes, sir.
The Notre Dame Mass, Is there a recording that you could recommend that somewhat mimics or is actually recorded in Notre Dame?
I have one that's not only recorded in Notre Dame, but is sort of the perfect example of this singing that demonstrates the influence of the Arab presence at the time. So what all do I owe y'all? I need to get you my show at
The
Notre
30,
Dame.
the 30 part stuff.
Yes,
Example of
the
that.
spamming
A
on.
Mighty Fortress and Dance Rhythm.
Yes, and the documentary.
Mighty Fortress. Documentary about equal temperament.
Can you also please send us a review of the chords and their names?
Do you mean the modes?
Yes.
Modes and their names? Yes. What I'll send you is a handout I used in my class that allows you to see things really clearly.
Thank you.
I'm letting you know that because I stole it.
Everything is stolen.
Everything is stolen.
No, everything belongs to everybody.
Yeah,
There's nothing new.
better
Yeah.
way of looking.
Just a different way of putting it together. But even then, I think I read today, in the year that Mozart wrote his last symphony, there was like 17,000 symphonies written that year. And we remember a grand total of about 10 of them from that year. So there's a lot of music written all the time. There's plenty of music to do.
So music before the medieval period, I'm kind of looking it up. There just really wasn't recorded. Is that why we don't study it, or?
Well, because there were definitely no recordings of the time, but also because there's no written notation.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant by recording.
Yeah.
Notation.
Or they would have passed that music down orally through an oral tradition, and it would have changed as people changed. So we can see remnants of that medieval flavor in early medieval music and in Renaissance music even. But there's a piece called the Epitaph of Sikelos, and I'll send that to you too. A very, very early form of notation, ancient Greek little hymn called the Epitaph of Sikelos was engraved into a tombstone. And we know what that sounded like because we know what the harps, the little lyres that the Greeks used of the day, and there's descriptions of that in their literature. And there's also the melody notated with little markings above each syllable of the word telling you to go up or down. And so we know what that piece sounds like. So you can kind of hear what that sounds like. I'll send that to you too, the Epitaph of Sikelos.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Do you know anything about music in other areas of the world and how there's any interchange between them?
Well, yeah. So
That'd be a whole new topic.
Well, it's important for us to state this, especially now. I think we brought a new focus. I hit the jackpot with some of my teachers early on, who were already getting away from this idea of ethno music, and world music.
Right.
Because what it does is it centers our thought around this Western European art tradition as if it was the paradigm that we function by, and everything else is the other.
Right.
What the facts are is that all of this music was constantly influenced by the music around it. And there's several wonderful examples of how this can be a glorious thing. Catholic monks in the Baroque period, a few missionaries who were musicians left Europe and went to Latin America, and they formed these little, monasteries out in the middle of the jungle. And so out in the middle of the jungle. And so they taught people in the surrounding area music in the Baroque tradition, right? So to fast forward 100 years later, there's this whole Bolivian Baroque where these guys from Bolivia are writing in this Baroque idiom influenced by the music of the jungle of Latin America. It is wonderful. And then, of course, there's all this North African influence in church music, and like I said in my shows, Messe de Notre Dame, all of this thing that a lot of people over the years have deliberately sort of washed from performances of that music, and I don't agree with it. I think it's wonderful. When I send you the Macho Messe de Notre Dame, I'm going to send you a recording of both. I'm going to send you the academic recording type of thing, and then I'm going to send you the one that's sort of faithful to what they would have actually sounded like, and you can hear the difference. It is a massive difference. One of them is just flat out boring, and the other one is like full of this fire that's amazing. Really wonderful. Any other thoughts? Any other fascinations? Inquiry is a good thing.
The Dufay that you gave us, I guess that's how you pronounce it.
Dufay.
Dufay. It had a kind of almost Arabic sound to me. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This is my pleasure. This has really filled my bucket. Thank you all so much for letting me teach you and talk about this thing that we love. And go back and take my advice. Go back and click on some of those links tonight and just listen to excerpts of all those things. And then this week, really dive into the music of the Baroque. You will have a very informed opinion about Bach and some of these other things if you really do take the time to listen to this music. I really encourage you to. It's going to open up many avenues of thought for you if you listen and listen closely. And I tried to give you links of things that have the score so that you can follow along, because if you have ADHD like me, if I'm just sitting there trying to listen and do nothing, I'm going to go crazy. So I like having the score in front of me too. But take the time to do that. This will be wonderful, and have lots of thoughts and opinions and controversial opinions about all of this stuff for us to discuss in detail next week as we slow down a little bit into the Baroque period. We don't have to cover so much territory next week. All right, y'all. Thank you so very much.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you.
Thank you.
Nice
so
to meet
much.
you, Elizabeth. Nice to meet you, all you people, and see you. Your wonderful shining faces. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Be well.
Bye.
Be well. Be well.
Bye-bye.
That was pretty cool. What do you think?